Welcome back to Snapshots of World War II. Sisters explore their grandfather's legacy. I'm Amanda.
And I'm Jenny. Today's episode follows our grandfather and the 357th Medical Detachment as they continue their journey through England, from quiet training fields to secret staging grounds.
Last time, we followed the unit's arrival in Kidderminster, England. This week, they'll move again. First to Camp Sudbury in Gloucestershire, and then to Racecourse Camp near Chepstow in Monmouthshire, Wales.
These may sound like peaceful places, and they were, but behind the calm landscapes, something massive was building. The 357th was on the final countdown to D-Day.
By April and May of 1944, the Allies were locking into place for the invasion of France. Units were being shuffled closer to the southern coast. Secrecy was tightening.
Our grandfather's unit was moving with purpose, and every stop they made brought them closer to the beaches of Normandy. But they didn't know that yet. To them, this was just another camp, another movement, another round of training drills. Let's look at the reports.
April 1944. Medical Detachment remained at Kidderminster for orientation and field training. Early May, unit transported by truck to Camp Sudbury, Lydney, Gloucestershire. Subsequent movement to Racecourse Camp, Chepstow, Monmouthshire. Continuation of medical field exercises and waterproofing of equipment. All personnel subject to movement orders. There's a sense of urgency between the lines here. Subject to movement orders. They didn't know it yet, but the invasion was weeks away.
Camp Sudbury and Racecourse Camp weren't permanent bases. They were temporary military camps established specifically for staging and training before D-Day.
Well, Camp Sudbury was located on the banks of the River Severn, near a quiet town. But in 1944, it was buzzing with troops, trucks, and tents. Then they moved to Racecourse Camp, built on an actual horse racing track near Chepstow. From what we've read, conditions were muddy, crowded, and tense.
And the biggest task at this point, waterproofing everything. Medical kits, bandages, surgical gear, all had to survive a beach landing.
When I read this part of the report, I imagined Grandpa rolling gauze into waterproof canisters, checking morphine syrettes, and not knowing where he'd be in a month.
Honestly, he might have been treating minor training injuries, sprains, cuts, trench foot, but emotionally, the preparation was internal.
They were being told less and less. Secrecy meant silence.
The entire 90th Infantry Division was undergoing similar preparation in southern England. By late May, they were all placed under what was called sealed orders. For the medics, that meant being ready to operate under fire in wet clothes on unfamiliar terrain without sleep. That was their reality.
According to the history of the 90th Division in World War II, through April and May, they ran through the world of invasion fever. D-Day might come at any hour, any day. The course of history hung on the ability of a group of Americans and British to seize a beach, hold it, and expand it. In Germany, the Wehrmacht confidently waited their Tag, knowing full well that they were more than a match for the untried, untested American army.
April dragged into its inevitable end and May stretched out. The Germans declared it was all a gigantic hoax. They thought there would be no invasion, that our generals had finally realized how impossible such an attempt would be, how foolhardy and suicidal to brave the armed might of Hitler's Reich. But the troops in England were not taking their orders from Germany. Instead, they waited patiently.
To better understand these weeks meant across southern England, we spoke with historian Paul Woodadge, who spent years studying this exact moment before D-Day. Paul Woodadge is a British-born World War II historian, author, battlefield guide, and founder of World War II TV, known for deep-dive battlefield analysis and long-form interviews with leading historians. Based in Normandy, France, he brings D-Day and the Normandy campaign to life through immersive storytelling, battlefield tours, and expert insight.
He's also the author of Angels of Mercy, the moving true story of two medics risking everything to save lives on D-Day. Welcome, Paul.
Well, I didn't even recognize myself in the introduction. It sounded like someone else. No, thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Oh my gosh. Paul, looking back at the spring of 1944, what did Britain feel like as so many American troops really started arriving in droves? We know some were already there, but this was millions.
It's an interesting time of the war because, I mean, obviously, a lot of Americans are arriving, but that's just one of a procession of nations that have been sending their people to Britain since 1940. So, Aussies and New Zealanders and Kiwis and South Africans and Poles and Czechs and everybody
Wow.
else who've been coming through.
Mhm.
So, cities that were particularly like near a train line, which Kidderminster, which comes into the story, was, would have been seeing people of all different colors and shades and accents and things for several years by the time you even get to early 44. So the Americans would have been just another nation coming through in a sense.
Okay.
But it's the peak of the majority of the British men still being overseas. So, there's a lot of prisoners of war who were captured in 1940 in Dunkirk, those that were captured in Singapore, North Africa. So
Yeah.
as exciting as it was for the people of Britain to see lots of Americans coming through and other nations who were going to be helping to defeat Hitler, there was a sense of, when are we going to see our boys, though? It's all very well, Billy Yank turning up, but what about Bill from down the road? When's he coming back? So there's the interactions were mostly positive, but there were bits of cultural misunderstandings that plagued all the arrival of these people. And I think, the jokes and things that were going around at the time, I think, play into that, that Britain was basically a large aircraft carrier at this time, full of units, full of vehicles, full of aircraft. And, and the comments, the overpaid, oversexed over here, that kind of thing. So, we can get into this in the conversation. It wasn't necessarily an instant meshing of these people coming through. There was excitement, but also some sort of suspicion and resentment on both sides. And so it was an interesting time.
Yeah.
Yeah, what kind of training did American units typically go through once they reached England?
Well, there was a conscious effort to try and make sure that these guys realized that they now were soldiers. They had done all the basic stuff. They knew now how to fire their rifles, how to drill, how to do that kind of stuff now. And they obviously realized they were going to the UK for a very significant reason. No one knew where they would be going and when they would be going, but it was obvious that they would be going there for the Second Front, which we now know obviously was France and Normandy. So there's a conscious effort to make sure to treat the men a little bit better. You're not treating them like raw recruits anymore. It's like, okay, we're going to another level now, another level of training. You've got the basics under your belt now. So it's more. The paradox is they're doing more specialist training without being told quite what the details of the specialist training are. It's a big balancing act between bringing these men up to speed for what they will be having to do within weeks or months, but at the same time, not giving them any information about what or where they're going for security. So it's a very complicated procedure that was actually discussed at quite a high level. People like General Marshall and others were saying, how will we try and integrate these people? What sort of training will we give them? Because we can't just immediately give them a map of France and say, right, we're practicing landing here, because that's just going to give the game away. So there's that, and there's lots and lots of moving people around, which we'll get into as one of your questions. Is that people think, why didn't they just park them somewhere and then leave them there for 6 months and then move them down the coast, which seems logical. Part of the reason they move these guys around all the time is so that they don't know what the hell they're doing. It's to sow this idea is you just don't know where you're going to be next Tuesday. Because if you don't know where you're going to be next Tuesday, it doesn't allow anybody to start having conversations. Everybody wants to know what's happening next. Every GI from Texas who gets to England is going, well, where are we going to go? Is it going to be France? Are we going to send us to the Far East? Are they going to send us to Norway, the Netherlands? So if you just keep the GIs confused all the time, you're limiting those conversations. So there's a lot going on. The training has to be focused, as I say, on what's going to be coming next without giving too much information about what the next is going to be. And at the same time, keep them in a constant state of confusion so that they're not able to put two and two together. That to me is a sort of summary of the whole process.
Part of a challenge then to help the troops really face different weather, terrains, and facilities. And we know the 357th Medics and the 90th went to several different staging areas, training areas. I'm assuming since they did it on purpose, then they had other purposes too. what they would be doing here is different than what they're doing there. We read several books where they're running terrain, hills, forests, um, waterproofing
Yep.
everything at other facilities. So I'm sure that also was hard to kind of stage that many men
Yeah.
in one sector of a country.
Yep. I mean, what they're having to do is they're having to put men through certain types of training that are specific to a particular area of England. So either because they've got the ability to use ordnance and firearms, so things like in Scotland or Northern Ireland or Wales, where you're away from city centres. If you're going to be, artillery practicing firing rounds, you don't do that in the city centre. But at the same time, you might also want to put some of the men through an urban warfare type training. There was a place in London. I don't think the 90th got involved in that. But there was a place in London where there was a bombed out part from the Blitz, where they say, okay, well, we'll use this now. The families have moved out. What we'll do is we'll put units through there. Today, in today's terms, they would call it fibua, fighting in built up areas. It didn't have a name back then. And the difficulty with the UK, of course, is that everything is under pressure. The railway system is under constant pressure because there are ordnance being moved down constantly. There's oil, there's fuel, there's bullets, beans, and bandages on the trains all the time. So someone says, an officer leading a battalion like you're talking about says, okay, we want to take these guys to this place on the map because that's the best place where they'll get training for this. Now you've got to fit that into the railroad. So they have to contact the rail operators, which is all now controlled by the army. And so we want to get these 2,000 men to this location. How are you going to do that? How are you going to get that arranged? How are you going to billet these people? How are you going to put them where they're going to be put? How are they going to eat when they get there? And these are the constant trials and tribulations. And one of the things that the Americans particularly found was everything seemed to be very much underfunded when they got to the UK. Where a training environment in the US that had been built, probably very recent in the war, was to some extent up to date. What you've done your research. These camps sprang up all over the USA of brand new barrack blocks and brand new environments and brand new this.
Yeah.
And now you're in the middle of wartime Britain where they're saying you're going to a training environment that in fact is just a converted old warehouse with all the windows are broken. And it's like, well, we're supposed to be doing that here.
Why was sleeping in
and
tents?
that was a real ordeal.
I could see that American soldiers having a hard adjustment.
Yeah.
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 Oh, and
Sleeping in
also
wet
for the
ground.
towns themselves, like, Kidderminster, areas near Chepstow, I'm sure their life would have changed dramatically as well. Like,
I mean, Kidderminster is if you're an American who wants to kind of understand what general middle England is, you could do far worse than start in Kidderminster. Because there are some towns in the UK that are primarily working class, industrializations, mining, steelworks. There's others that are agricultural. There are some that are kind of touristy down the south coast. Kidderminster literally, and Chepstow as well to some extent, is a bit of everything. Kidderminster, there's a big carpet industry. There's lots of weaving, but also in the north part of Worcestershire, there's mining, there's steelworks. There's also, because you're close to the Wye Valley, or the Severn Valley, there's also tourism. There's pretty bridges. There's pretty country parks. It was an area that had experienced some of the Blitz, but not the worst of the Blitz. But you're close enough to have realized that war was there. I mean, from places like Kidderminster, you would be able to see the fires burning at Coventry, which is, a couple of dozen miles away. And I think Kidderminster, for example, was only bombed twice, I think, in World War II. Cardiff, which is closer to Chepstow, was bombed quite a lot. I mean, when I say quite a lot, by UK standards, not very much. I think 2,000 bombs fell on Cardiff and 350 civilians were killed. Which sounds quite bad when you say it like that, when it was. I'm not belittling those 350 people killed. But from a city of Cardiff size, compared to Liverpool, compared to Birmingham, compared to London, they got off quite lightly. So Kidderminster is like, if you unblindfolded an American from Texas or Chicago and say, I want to understand what Middle England is about, Kidderminster is a really good example of just ordinary Shire folk. When Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings and talked about Shire folk, he's kind of talking about the people of Kidderminster in a roundabout way,
Mm,
just good,
okay.
ordinary, Middle England shopkeepers, railway workers, and things like that, who'd suffered a little bit in the war. Everybody had a relative who was away. Everybody was
Right.
suffering from rationing, but not the direct. In Kidderminster, you're not going past bombed out buildings every day, but you knew it was happening because I say you could see the glow of when Coventry was bombed or when Birmingham was bombed. And it's to some extent, both Kidderminster and Chepstow, they've always had a traditional army
Mhm.
connection. Kidderminster is referred to as sort of an army town. There were educational centres in Sudbury, for example. For the British Army had education centres and schools there for like 4 or 5 decades before World War II comes around. So and I know you haven't got to that question yet, but one of the biggest things the GIs faced
Yeah.
was, from their standards, poverty around them. Now, not poverty in like a third world way, but how these Brits were eking out on rationing by 44. The war is being won now. The page has been turned.
Okay.
The Battle of the North Atlantic is kind of the struggles of getting enough stuff to Britain are kind of in the past. We've pushed the Germans out of North Africa. The Soviets are pushing the Germans out of their territory. That it looks like the end is in sight, but you're still living on, one egg every 2 weeks, all that kind of stuff. And the
Wow.
Americans, who are to some extent have more food now than they had in the USA in some ways, because there's a real commitment to making sure these guys have the chow lines are always, there's plenty of food there. There's all your meat and gravy, and there's C rations and K rations and all that kind of stuff when you're on maneuvers. And one of the biggest cultural things that the GIs had to learn, this would have happened to countless of the men that, your grandfather and his comrades knew, is you can't just give the Brits food. It's like a food bank today. You can't just say, well, here we are, we've got some spare cans of beans, and give
Mhm.
them to the Brits, because that just goes down really badly because of the pride. So
Oh.
so they had to work out, and there was a training film, you can find it on YouTube, with Burgess Meredith, Mickey from Rocky films.
Yeah.
It's teaching, it's a bit patronizing. It's weird to watch it now, but it's kind of trying to aim at how the Americans should act in England I think it was made in 42 or 43. It's really interesting. It's a real time capsule of how the Brits thought of the Americans and how the Americans thought of the Brits. So what would happen is an American GI would maybe get to know the girl who's on the bus, because the men are it's women everywhere. Women are doing all the trades.
Yeah.
One of my favorite feminist facts about Britain in World War II is, when you add it all up, more women were in some sort of uniform in World War II
Mhm.
than men.
Yeah.
Because it's in the factories, it's the bus drivers, it's the train drivers, all this kind of stuff there. So if you're a GI and you're young and you want to meet girls, you get chatting to the girl who's the conductor on the bus, or you get chatting to the girl who's punching your train ticket, whatever it would be. And eventually you get invited round for dinner, if you're lucky, and you go there as a GI, and they're giving you food that, from your point of view, you wouldn't kind of give your dog,
Gotcha.
and they're giving you their best because you're the GI, you're the conquering hero who's coming there to help liberate. And you as a GI, you've not even seen combat yet, but they don't know that. They probably think you fought through North Africa, but you actually you're green. You're effectively straight off the boat.
Yeah.
And
They
you're
are.
seeing this British family share out their belongings, and it's passing we didn't have tea bags around then, but passing a tea bag from mug to mug to mug,
Mhm.
that you've used, that's been on the kitchen drainer for 2 weeks already.
Mhm.
You're having this weak tea, and these GIs went back, in tears at what they were seeing. So what they would do is they would say, "Well, next week, can we bring you something to help?" And
Oh,
the British housewife would say, "Well, no, dear, don't worry about that, dear. We're fine here." But you'd have to kind of overcome that. Well, and you'd lie. You'd say, "Well, we've got loads of this stuff. We end up throwing it away." You'd say, as a GI from
yeah.
Oklahoma, "Yeah, we just throw this stuff out." "Oh, well, if the British woman would go, well, if it's going spare, dear, please bring it round." And he'd come round the next time with 6 tins of whatever it would be. and then help do the meal and that kind of, this was happening up and down the country with every American unit that arrived. So it doesn't matter whether you're 90th or the 29th or whoever it would be, they're all encountering this same thing. And I find that in some ways far more interesting than the training programs. I mean, the training
The
programs are,
integration of the two.
but it's
worlds.
how people's got on with each other,
Mhm.
and overcoming those things. And you're a GI, you feel quite confident about yourself because you've been trained. But you're sitting there, and the family that are now feeding you, there's the photo on the mantelpiece of their son who's been in Singapore, in Changi, or in Changi prison for 2 years. And they're treating you as the hero, but you're thinking, oh God, but I haven't done anything yet. I only got off the boat last week.
Mhm.
These were the cultural and social things that were really interesting. And the other thing, while I'm on that subject, then I will let you get a question
No.
in, is one of the elephants in the room was the absence of racism in the UK.
Yeah.
The US Army was
Yeah.
segregated, as we know, in World War II.
Yes.
And as a
Mhm.
GI, you didn't see. You were kept away. Well, the black troops are kept away from the white troops, etc., etc. But in UK, it wasn't like that. There are French colonial black troops in the streets. There are people from around the world in different cultures,
Yep.
and there were really no incidents. British-based, the few notable incidents that occurred in 1944 of racial tension were Americans, and it was white Americans getting really annoyed at African Americans getting the same welcome by the same British families as the white guys got. And there were some very notable riots and arrests and things that happened in the UK that have been written about,
Mhm.
but didn't get talked about for years and years because it didn't fit the narrative at the time of everybody working together. And it's not that Britain, I'm not saying for a minute Britain didn't have its own racial issues, because it did, particularly 20 years later, in the 60s when we start bringing people over from our colonies to work in Britain. But at that time, frankly, there were so few people of a different color. We hadn't learned how to be racist. Human beings learn how to be racist. You children,
Correct.
babies play together despite what color they are. You learn your
Mhm.
hatred. And some of these, particularly from the South, Americans from the South came over and realized that there's a very different setup there. And that was something. And the Burgess Meredith film, it sort of circles around. That there's bits where it's kind of mentioning that, but it doesn't actually go as far as saying anything, but they're kind of hinting that
Mhm.
Britain has maybe a different view about these things. Than I mean, in 1940, I'm going off on a tangent. In 1940, 40 up Dunkirk, one of the units that
Yep.
marched down through London were the Indian troops who got out at Dunkirk. So these are people in turbans, Sikhs, and others who'd bravely been part of the British Army in
Mhm.
1940, and they're afforded exactly the same rights to parade through London as the British and English and Welsh and Scottish regiments. So Americans arriving from the South found that a massive, massive, great culture shock. And some adapted very well and went, okay, fine, but some didn't. It's like read about the Tuskegee Airmen meeting white,
Okay.
flyers for the first time. Sometimes it went well and sometimes it didn't go well. So that's another big factor of Britain had got very used to the different people of different nations
Mhm.
speak different languages, all working together in the same spaces. When an air raid occurs, for example, you just all pile into whatever the nearest shelter is. But in that shelter may be French people and
Right.
African Americans and white people and locals and nuns and children and whatever. And you just had to get on with it.
Would you say
Going
that
back.
contributed more to the overall mood of American soldiers at that time, as well as, um, what all they're going through with their training and all the secrecy?
Yeah.
Um, what would you say, like, the overall mood, among them were that?
Well, I think it became very real. I
Yeah,
think there's a lot of middle America had
yeah.
really escaped the worst of World War II and always escaped the worst of World War II. And this is not me being anti-American at all, but rationing in the US was shortages. Rationing in Poland is you literally haven't got enough to eat at all for weeks and years on end. So it was a massive, great culture shock, and I think for the GIs who arrived in the middle of still war-torn UK, it was a realization is shit, this war's real. You know, these people have lost. You know, they've lost lots of stuff already. They've lost people already. Sure, lots of Americans have died as well. I mean, I'm not saying that they hadn't, and Pearl Harbor and Tara and Peleliu, but there was you've got to see it for yourself. You've got to see it. Reading about it is one thing. Seeing it is something else. And you know, the train ride, because we went to answer your question about the training, there was lots of opportunities to let people go on leave. Because the training centers were so in demand, there was a queue to get in. So units that you're writing about would have had 2 weeks where well, we can't go to the urban warfare training because the 29th are there. We can't go to the rifle range because the 79th are there. We can't go to this week. So we could just make them run up and down hills again for a week. And there was lots of that.
Yes.
But lots of opportunity to give these guys their 48-hour passes and their 72-hour passes so they could go and do stuff.
Yeah.
And they'd have traveled down to places like London. And every train journey in the UK would always have had some interruption. Well, we've had to divert at so-and-so now because of, you know, there's problem on the line because an aircraft has crashed and something else. So you'd have been stuck in sidings and platforms, you know, seeing ambulances go past and things like that, because even though the Blitz was over, aircraft were still crashing. You know, I mean, there are in one of the church cemeteries near Sedbury are dozens of German POWs who died in captivity in England during the time the 90th Division were there, because they're people who've been captured in North Africa, but they were captured, but they were already wounded, and they're eventually succumbing to disease, or maybe they were in a bombing raid and they were killed there. So the point I'm making is that death, loss, injury, wounds, shortage of this, shortage of that was not hidden anymore. So I think your GI is learning that, God, this war is real, and we're going to be part of this soon.
Yeah.
And yet you don't know where you're going and when you're going to go and what exactly you're going to have to do.
Yeah, what's going to happen? Nobody knows yet. Wow.
Yeah, we could see the scale of that in my grandfather's photographs, from tent camping in England to getting over to France. And then when you're in the countryside, he has pictures of women. He's in the back of one of the pictures. The women do everything over here. They're doing everything. So going back to what you were saying, it matches up. I don't know if he had or just didn't take pictures of opportunities to travel as much on his passes, but it is interesting to see the correlation of what you're saying in the path that he left us. So it's interesting.
Well, I'm glad I'm filling in some gaps here. I mean, and it is that, you know, the cultural difference, I think, is very, very important as well.
Very important.
And then as it gets closer and closer to June, the fact that, again, the secrecy ramps up, and then the passes stop again, because now, you know, the movement has stopped. At a certain point, the jigsaw puzzle now has to be put together. The training is done now. Now you have to start filling up all the sausage camps, you know, around and okay. And the army, to some extent, is still deciding the order of divisions to be arriving in France. They know who the assault waves on the first day are going to be.
Okay.
But there's a certain amount of we'll have to wait and see about what's going to be happening over the next 48, 36, hours, because the beachhead work as well as expected? Will we need to reinforce it sooner? Will we have to wait a bit before we reinforce it? So a unit like the 90th, who are like this, they're the next ones in. Obviously there were a handful of men of the 90th were there on June the 6th, but the majority coming in over the 7th and 8th and 9th, what have you. So they might have said, well, we're not going to send another unit in yet because it's still too, or we might send them in early. There's a certain amount of shuffling of the pack. And the biggest thing that the officers in the 90th would have had to have dealt with is the secrecy and the fact that the only way, I'm going to try and backpedal a bit. I'm not of the opinion that D-Day stood a chance of failing. D-Day, the Allies have stacked the decks, right? And I mean that literally and figuratively. They have literally taken every precaution they can. They've got aerial photos of every inch of France. They've been bombing all the railway hubs for a couple of months. They've got resistance networks setting up doing this. They've got a plan in place to deal with the German counterattacks coming. They've got the intelligence. They're reading the German Enigma code. They're doing all this. They've trained all these units like the 90th to be at a peak of ability and preparedness and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so much would have to have gone wrong for the Allies on D-Day, and so much would have had to have gone right for the Germans on D-Day for it to fail. But, and this is the point I'm going to make, at the beginning, at H hour on June the 6th, the Allies have to have complete tactical surprise.
Right.
So tactical surprise means that on that morning, whenever that morning is going to be, is that Franz, Kurt, and Karl in their German bunker have to be totally surprised when they see the fleet coming through the fog towards them and go, "Mein Gott, was ist das?" And not know about it. And to keep it secret is I think, the biggest challenge in some ways, more than actually getting these men ready in the first place. So you're talking about let's crunch some numbers. 156,000 men are going to be landing on D-Day. Every day for the next few days, you're talking another between 20 and 50,000 men landing. Then you're talking tens of thousands of personnel in the various navies that are supporting this.
Yeah.
Another tens of thousands of personnel in the Air Force supporting this. And they reckon that prior to the morning of June the 6th, less than 1,000 of those men knew it was actually going to be Normandy.
That's
So
amazing.
within the 90th, you're probably talking about a dozen men knew it was going to be Normandy up to like the last few hours.
That's amazing that they were
Now,
able to.
they knew what they were. They do know what they're going to be doing, and they know roughly what the area they would be going to would be laid out like, because they used the fake maps or the real maps with fake names with everything blotted out. and you worked on maps without seeing coastlines. You don't let the men see enough to put a picture, but they would know that there's a transport hub here, there's a hill here, you'd be coming this way going south. But other than that, that map could be the Netherlands, it could be Norway, it could be Japan. And then you get the last maps. Pretty much you get them on the boat. And that would have applied even after D-Day started. So even after the actual invasion has started, the 90th and the 79th, all those other units coming in next week, they're still opening those sealed things. They're still only going, because there's still this idea that they might be sent somewhere else, because Hitler amazingly believed, even after hours have been unfolding in Normandy, that it still was a diversion for an even bigger one coming in Pas-de-Calais. So we still have to keep piling information on that we're going somewhere else. So even in the 90th Division, when you're literally hearing on the radio, a landing has been made in France between Cherbourg, even those guys are still being kept in the dark, so that they might still think, well, we're not even still sure we're going there. We might be going to India. We might be going to, so this secrecy thing. So the kind of thing that the personnel that your grandfather was attached with would have been dealing with. I had a friend of mine, right? Or a friend of mine, Chris, British guy from the Northeast. His dad spent about 2 months in April, May of 44 with a truck, British Army truck, full of tropical uniforms, right? And his job was to go to it was all set out for him, to go to as many camps as he could, British, American, Polish, every day, park his truck up, and then go into the canteen and have a cup of coffee, right? That's his job, right?
Okay.
And what would happen is, he's sitting there having he's British, he's having a cup of tea, is the cook would go, "What are you doing here, mate?" "I can't tell you. I've just been told to unload something here."
Okay.
"Oh, well." And then while he was having his tea, the cook would send his assistant cook out and said, "Go and have a look in the back of the truck. Go and have a look in the back of the truck." They'd have a look in the back of the truck, and it's tropical uniforms.
Wow.
And then the guy would get back in his truck and drive off somewhere else. And what he's done is he's sowed a seed of doubt in that camp.
Yep.
Because a rumor like that would spread like wildfire.
Yes.
And I can guarantee you that things like that would have been happening to your grandfather's unit all through April and May, and someone has devised this, some like maestro, some puppet
Wow.
master in London has thought, well, what we'll do is we'll send a guy around and this is just one thing. So maybe there's another guy going out there just saying, oh, I teach people Swahili, language instructor. So then I go, did you hear there was a guy in the canteen yesterday? He was there. He's a professor of languages. He teaches Swahili. Do you think we're going to Africa? Perhaps we're going to Central Africa.
That would have been me.
And that's how units like the 90th were completely kept in the dark, is if you give them enough misinformation, you can, Churchill said it, you protect the truth with a bodyguard of lies. So you just keep everything totally confused. And I know you're going to ask me about the hedgerows, because that's one of the things. My favorite question is, why didn't the Americans know about the hedgerows? The 90th Division, as you know, gets straight to Normandy, and it's like, what the hell are these things? What are these 12 earth banks, all these tree stuff coming out the top of it? How the hell are we supposed to fight through that? And people say, why didn't we know about them? Well, the answer is we did know about them. The Allies know everything about the hedgerows. The Allies have entire surveys. They know where all the water supplies are. They know where the soil changes from this. There are French people who've lived in Normandy, who've been in the French commandos, who've told the Allies, by the way, messieurs, all the trees there in Normandy are they're hedgerows. The thing is, though, is that you have to protect the security of protecting the tactical surprise is more important than your grandfather knowing the terrain of where he's going.
That's crazy.
So, because what happens is if they say, okay, the 90th are going to be going through Normandy, why don't we take all the company commanders, all the battalion commanders, all the surgeons, all the supply officers, all the engineers, and we'll take them to this camp, one of these constant movings about they did in April and May, and we will brief them. We will brief them about the terrain of Normandy. But of course, we will tell them. Don't tell anybody, of course. Don't tell anybody, of course. But what happens if someone gets drunk in a pub? What if someone talks in their sleep on a train carriage? Now, we now know that every single German agent that was operating in the UK had actually been turned and they were working for us. There were none that were rogue, we think. Okay. There are still some papers that are under lock and key in London, but we think everyone was working for us. But what if there is a German agent who's on a train from Kidderminster to London in May 1944, and an officer of a division is sleeping because he's been up and training for the last week, and he's talking in his sleep. Bocage, the hedgerows, and I'm making light of it. But that's the reason why no one knew. So it was known at a high level, but it was too much of a risk to arm every person who'd be going through Normandy with the information, because if the Germans get that information, they don't arrive in Normandy alive, because the Germans are there waiting for them. So you've come at this project, which is a wonderful project. I back you all the way from the point of view of reading the memoirs of 90th Division people going, why the hell didn't we know about this stuff? So you've come at it from one side of this story. Now, hopefully, I'm putting you this other part of the story where you go, there's a secrecy issue.
Yeah.
It's far more important that the land goes well and we get a full army there, and then basically they'll just have to work out how to deal with the hedgerows when they get there. Now, I'm going to go against what I said, because one of the things they could have done is they could devise some technology, because technology can't talk, right? So if they had the idea in advance about the hedgerows, and they'd said to the armored people, right, how would you move Sherman tanks to this environment? Because eventually they invented the Rhino hedgerow cutters in Normandy, the tusks type blades on the front of Sherman, so they could cut through the hedgerows rather than go over them. And the 90th would have fought alongside these things towards late July, Operation Cobra era, into the Falaise Gap. Because They could have made these things and basically put them under lock and key. A gadget cannot tell a German agent what it's there for. And then they could have brought these things over and put them. So some of the technology could have been thought about, put aside, and then again, I mean, the infantry, for example, would have dealt with like explosive charges to blow gaps through hedgerows. So despite the fact I said it was essential they keep the plan secret, there were some things they could have predicted and made things a bit better. But, but the other thing about the hedgerows, and I've had this conversation many times over the last 20 or 30 years, it was all the hedgerows. Okay, so you're an American. Choose a terrain you'd like to have to face the Germans in. Because the hedgerows weren't great.
No.
But what do you want? What's better? The dust of Tunisia, the pine forests of the Ardennes. The point is, wherever you end up dealing with the Germans, you're going to have to deal with the Germans.
Yeah.
And the terrain, in some ways, is just an excuse for the fact that the Germans will have a say in this. And the Germans were pretty damn good. They knew how to fight for every inch. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
They are masters of an organized retreat, which is what they'd be doing in Normandy, because they've been doing that since the latter part of 1941, when they're being pushed out of Moscow. The Germans know 3 years they've spent fighting inch by inch and trying to kill as many Allied soldiers, in this case Soviets, for every inch they take. So that's basically how they're going to work Normandy. They're not going to win Normandy, but if every Yank, every GI, every Tommy, every Canuck they can kill in Normandy, every Pole, for every yard they take, is them getting closer, theoretically, to a solution that ends up some sort of negotiated peace. So, yeah, the hedgerows weren't fun, but none of the environments the American army fought through in World War II were fun. There is no ideal terrain in which to engage in. And the Germans didn't particularly like the hedgerows either, because they're difficult to coordinate. So the hedgerows have become a bit of an easy opt-out to say, oh, well, it was all the hedgerows' fault. When sometimes it's Allied leadership, sometimes it's, problems of command, which is a subject very close to the 90th Division, that they go, they just can't quite find the right guy at the top.
Yep.
Until they get Van Fleet later on, it all just goes, and they end the war, for my money, one of the most effective American divisions in the ETO. But their first few weeks, as you know, I'm not telling you anything you don't know, were a bit tricky, to say the least.
It was a lot. We went through a whole lot of research on that one. You're right.
So I've rambled a bit there, but I'm hopefully I'm giving some interesting stuff along the way.
You are. I'm going to ask you just a more personal question. What has been the most memorable moment of your career so far? I mean, you've guided visitors to battlefields, you wrote books, and you're filming for WWII TV. Where would you land on your precipice?
I mean, I do Ask Me Anythings on my channel. I quite regularly did one last night, and it sounds a bit sort of pretentious, but I've had so many amazing memories. To try and put them down to one, I mean, I'm very grateful that my first years here were when the veterans were coming over in huge numbers. And the few veterans that are coming now, they're 100 plus, and they're all in wheelchairs. It's fantastic meeting them. But back in the day, they were in their late 70s, early 80s, and they were hopping over the barbed wire fences and running across the fields and showing me their foxholes. Whereas now it's sort of, you get the wheelchair as close as you can to the edge of the field and point, because there's no way you could get the guy across the field to where he was. So, the times I've spent with veterans where their friends were killed, with sons and daughters where their family members were wounded, were amazing.
It's the personal experiences.
Personal experiences. I mean, and one of the things I think is very important is that I enjoy getting to know veterans beyond just what they did in World War II. Because obviously, you meet a Pearl Harbor survivor. Where were you on December the 7th? But I also would like to say, what were you doing 20 years later?
Oh,
how did your memories of the war affect your growing up? You know, what, and you hope they get to the point where if they had issues, they will reveal them to you and say, you know what, Paul, I struggled with alcohol. I wasn't a very good husband for 10 years because I didn't know how to, deal with it. I mean, I've spoken to wives of veterans. There's one I won't name the veteran who, for about 50 years after the war, half the nights he would try and strangle her in his sleep because of the fear of Japanese infiltrating foxholes where he was in Tarawa and all that kind of stuff. And she learned she could have just gone. I mean, I think I'd have gone if I was in a marriage like that. Despite how much I loved the person, I'd be out the door. I think I
right,
couldn't deal with that.
right.
But she learned how to gradually wake him up and say, "You're safe, you're safe, you're safe," while she's pulling his hands away from her throat. And eventually, because it was a generation that they didn't go to see therapists. They didn't.
Right.
The bottle was the only medication they would go to. I'm sounding like just facetious about it, but that's kind of the medication they would take. Eventually, they found a way of dealing with it, and they put it behind them. And I think it was partly because this particular veteran returned to battlefields, and he saw some of the places that have been so horrific with peace there, and kids, jumping about, seeing why is this old guy coming back and pointing at this bit of mud that he'd been, X number of years earlier. So being peripheral to journeys like that has been absolutely amazing. And now, because I'm getting older, meeting young people who are incredibly excited by things, because, I was lucky. I met the veterans and the kids of veterans.
Mhm.
It's the grandkids. Case in point being where I am today. But I've got a guest on my channel a couple of weeks' time who's it's her great grandfather she's written about.
Well, good for her.
Yeah.
And she's like 25 or something. And her great
Amazing.
grandfather was on a B-17, shot down, prisoner of war, Stalag Luft 3, same camp as where the Great Escape came from. And she's put an incredible book together in her 20s about her great grandfather. It's
Oh.
like, well, that's fantastic.
What a story. What a man.
Yeah.
So, I've got too many memories, too many good memories. But of course, the sad ones we're closing the door on the veterans now.
Yeah.
We have to find new methods of bringing the younger people who don't have the direct connection through, because your challenge in a sense with your book project is to widen the interest outside of the circle of people who have an absolute immediate interest. And I don't mean that in a belittling way.
Oh, I know.
Your family, but this is where granddad was, but to try and share it to other people who didn't know your grandfather, didn't know the Battle of Normandy, or didn't understand that's the big sell. You've got to find that avenue, be it, and that's why I have no problem with things like, Band of Brothers and Masters of the Air and comics and video games, because I call them entry level drugs. They're some 16-year-old kid playing a video game, Call of Duty or something, might just pick up the book that accompanies that and learn about the First Division on Omaha Beach and become a tour guide or historian. So that's the challenge moving forward, is to make sure that as it recedes into the past, it still has that personal connection with people, trying to find that, that little inroad to it. So yeah, now I've had lots of fantastic moments. This time last year, I was being interviewed for the new Tom Hanks documentary that's coming out. So I'm a talking head in 3 of the episodes.
That's
I
awesome.
think there's 10 episodes or 12, I think. I'm in the Normandy one, obviously, Berlin and the Ardennes one. And so I went to London, and no, I didn't get to meet Tom Hanks before you ask. But I'm being filmed with 2 or 3 cameras on me, and then it's being zoomed back to the film office in New York. And apparently Tom Hanks had seen the interview of me that was conducted online and approved my appearance in that. So I'm in that, which will be nice. But being recognized as being able to communicate about this stuff is kind of gratifying, because I'm going down to town. When I was interviewed for this TV series, the guy who interviewed me said, I actually only started learning about World War II like 3 weeks ago. So part of me is thinking, well, what are you asking me about then? But then I realized, oh no, he assumes I know this stuff, the history. What he's checking, and there's another person there as well, is whether or not I can communicate it well. because
There you go.
we've all got the teacher we remember who knew their stuff but was hopeless. We've all got the teacher we remember who knew their stuff but was brilliant. So I you can probably tell I get excited. I like seeing your faces when I'm talking about the hedgerows because I see these cogs whirring and I feel things clicking into place. I feel
Yeah.
this sort of synchronicity of the different angles we come at this history from. And I've got an angle and you two have got an angle, and together you get a rounder picture.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've certainly given me a perspective on that I hadn't thought of at all. Yes.
Well, thank you
Wow.
so much
Yes,
for
thank
sharing
you.
everything with us, all your expertise and excitement. It makes us excited. From the
Mhm.
beaches of Normandy to the hidden stories of D-Day, you really brought the history to life and to us. I really had a good time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And
I've got
you're so great.
Oh, thank you. And
Well,
also for anyone who wants to dive deeper, be sure to check out Angels of Mercy and explore WW2 TV, where Paul continues to uncover the stories, strategies, and sacrifices that shaped World War II.
thanks so
Thank you.
much. You're the
Thank you.
best. I
Yes.
can't wait to meet you when we get over there. So
That'd be
we'll
good.
give you
Yeah, no, and it's I really want to get to chat to you and see what your opinions are of the of the 90th, and this leadership thing is really interesting because long story short, when I take people to the Falaise Gap on a tour,
Mhm.
the 90th underperform in that battle to some extent
Mhm.
compared to the Canadians and the Poles, right?
Mhm.
That's me as a historian. I'm not playing favorites. I'm just saying. But when I do it, I always say, but here's the context, right? Here's what had happened a few weeks earlier at Montcastre. And when you're standing at the bottom of Hill 122 and you're hearing about the tank battalions there and infantry there, all that kind of stuff there,
Mhm.
it all will slot into place,
Yeah,
as to why soldiers don't perform badly naturally. If they're performing badly, it's because something is wrong, something is not going well. And the 90th had this itch it couldn't quite scratch. That they, and Eisenhower doesn't know how to cure it either. I mean, he kept referring to them, as you know, as a problem division without quite knowing what the problem was. And I feel it's our duty as historians that if you're criticizing a commander or a unit in one place, that
right.
you quantify it and you say, but this was their worst day, and then later on they get much better.
They do. Well, thank
And
you so much.
Thank
You're
you
the
for
best.
yes.
I try.
Well
I'm happy.
appreciated.
If you invite me back for a Normandy episode, you'll have to get plenty of. I know it's digital, but plenty of tape because
Yeah.
I've got lots to say about the 90th in Normandy. Some of it good, some of it not so good. But trust me, there's a lot to talk about, as you know.
There is.
But if you
Thanks
want to
so
come me
much.
back, I'm happy to come back. Anyway,
Yes.
thank you.
Thank you.
Talk soon.
Right,
Bye.
I'm off.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank
Nice talking
you.
to you.
Nice to meet you.
Bye.
Bye. Hearing that makes these short minute reports feel so much heavier because suddenly we know what they were really standing on the edge of.
These weeks in Gloucestershire and Monmouthshire were the last quiet days before the storm. It's where training ended and waiting began.
The minute reports don't show emotion, but behind every line is a group of young men mentally preparing for what none of them could truly imagine.
And our grandfather was one of them, quiet, steady, and carrying more than just his gear.
Next week, we will travel with the 357th to the edge of no turning back.
The 357th Medics receive orders and they move toward the coast. Thanks for joining us on Snapshots of World War II. We're so honored to walk through history with you, one report at a time.
Subscribe, share, and leave a review if this story resonates with you. And if your family has its own wartime story, we'd love to hear it.
Until next time, stay curious.
And keep remembering. Bye.
Bye.